In the small town of Millbrook, Pennsylvania, nestled between rolling hills and farmland, there was a coffee shop called The Daily Brew, where everyone knew everyone's business. On a cold Tuesday morning in February, Sarah Mitchell sat in the corner booth nursing her black coffee, trying to be invisible. But invisibility, she would learn, was something she had become very good at. Sarah was 42 years old, but the pain in her back made her feel older. Her short blonde hair was graying at the temples, and her hands, once steady and sure, now trembled slightly when she was tired. She'd been home for 3 months now, discharged from the military after 20 years of service. 20 years. 2 decades of her life given to something she believed in with her whole heart. The waitress, a younger woman named Kelly, refilled her cup without making eye contact. Sarah had learned that this was how it worked now. People didn't know what to say to her anymore, so they said nothing. They looked through her, around her, anywhere but directly at her. Sarah had served as a master sergeant in the United States Army. She had led troops in combat zones. She had made life-and-death decisions. She had earned the respect of every soldier under her command. But here, back in Millbrook, she was just the woman who sat in the corner booth. The woman people felt awkward around. Her daughter, Emma, was worried about her. Emma called every evening at 6 o'clock, right on schedule. She was 23 now, working as a nurse in Pittsburgh, about 40 minutes away. Sarah knew that Emma called out of obligation, not because she really understood what her mother was going through. How could she? Emma had never served. Emma had never had to make the choices Sarah had made. Sarah's husband, Tom, had left her 6 years ago. He said he couldn't handle the deployments anymore. He said he needed a wife who was actually present. Sarah had understood, in her logical, military way of thinking. She had signed the divorce papers without fighting him. That was how she handled difficult things, she accepted them, processed them, and moved forward. It was a skill that had served her well in the army. In civilian life, it just made people think she didn't feel anything at all. The town of Millbrook had about 8,000 people. It was the kind of place where the high school football team was a big deal, where the annual county fair drew crowds, and where everyone went to church on Sunday and talked about it on Monday. Sarah's father had been born and raised here. Her grandfather had worked at the mill that gave the town its name, back when mills still existed. The town had history, roots, belonging. Sarah didn't feel like she belonged anymore. She had tried to find work. The unemployment office had been kind enough, in a pitying sort of way. The counselor, a woman named Patricia with reading glasses on a chain, had suggested retail or customer service. Sarah had nodded and smiled, but they both knew she wouldn't be working at Target. She had a pension. It wasn't much, but it was enough. What she didn't have was purpose. 3 weeks ago, she had gone to the Millbrook Community Center to attend a veteran support group. It was held on Thursday evenings in a fluorescent-lit basement room that smelled like old carpet and disappointment. There were 5 other veterans in the group, all men, all older than her. The facilitator was a young woman in her 30s who had never served but had read a lot of books about trauma. Sarah sat through one meeting and never went back. The problem was this: Sarah didn't feel traumatized. She felt angry. There was a difference, though most people couldn't tell the distinction. She was angry about the way her body had failed her. A spinal injury from a vehicle accident during her last deployment had left her in chronic pain. The army doctors had done what they could, but they had made it clear, she was done. No more field duty. Desk work, maybe, if she wanted to stay in, but staying in without serving was not something Sarah could do. She was angry about the isolation. About the way civilians looked at her like she was broken. About the way people thanked her for her service in a tone of voice that sounded like they were thanking her for taking out the trash. She was angry about being erased. That Tuesday morning, as Sarah sat in the Daily Brew, 2 men walked in. They were in their 60s, both wearing jackets with military insignia on them. Veteran jackets. The kind men wore to show they had served. They noticed the insignia on Sarah's own jacket, a simple logo for the army, and made eye contact with each other. Then they looked at her. One of them, a large man with a gray beard, came over to the booth. "You military?" he asked. "Was," Sarah said simply. The man's face brightened. "How long you serve?" 20 years, Sarah said. The man's smile faded a little. "That's a long time." "What branch?" "Army," Sarah said. The man stood there for a moment, as if he was about to say something else. Then his friend called to him from their booth, and he excused himself. Sarah watched them settle in 2 booths away. She could see them glancing at her occasionally, and she could tell they were discussing her. They were probably wondering what she had done, what rank she had held, whether she had seen combat. People always wanted the story. Sarah didn't want to tell the story. She just wanted her coffee. That evening, Emma called at 6 o'clock, right on schedule. "Hi, Mom. How was your day?" Emma asked, and Sarah could hear the exhaustion in her daughter's voice. She had been working a double shift. "Fine," Sarah said. "Long. Are you sleeping okay?" Emma asked. This was the question she asked most nights. "Well enough," Sarah lied. There was a pause on the line. Emma was looking for more, some sign that her mother was getting better, that the anger was fading, that she was healing. "I've been thinking," Emma said carefully, "maybe you should volunteer somewhere. You know. Give yourself something to do. Some purpose." Sarah closed her eyes. Purpose. Everyone wanted to talk about purpose like it was something you could just find lying around if you looked hard enough. "Maybe," Sarah said. After they hung up, Sarah sat in her small rental house on Maple Street and stared at the television without really watching it. Outside her window, the street was quiet. Millbrook was always quiet in the evenings. People were home with their families, eating dinner, watching television, living normal lives. Normal lives where nobody was invisible. But what Sarah didn't know, what she couldn't have known that Tuesday night, was that her invisibility was about to change. In 3 days, something would happen in Millbrook that would force people to see her. And once they started looking, they would have to confront what they had been ignoring all along. 3 days later, General Margaret Sullivan would arrive in Millbrook for the county's annual Veterans Day Parade. And everything would change. The Millbrook Veterans Day Parade happened every November, without fail. It was one of the town's most important traditions. The high school marching band played, the Boy Scouts walked, local businesses floated their contributions on decorated trucks, and at the center of it all, the town invited a military figure to serve as the Grand Marshal. It was a small honor for a small town, but it meant something. This year, they had managed to secure a 4-star general. General Margaret Sullivan, a woman who had risen to the highest ranks of the United States Army, had agreed to serve as the Grand Marshal. She was the commanding general of the Eastern Command, a position of enormous responsibility and power. The town council had been talking about it for months, preparing, planning, making sure everything would be perfect. Sarah had not been paying attention to any of this. She had not planned to attend the parade. Parades meant crowds, and crowds meant people, and people meant that awkward mixture of pity and discomfort that she had come to expect. But Emma had called 3 days before the parade. "Mom, I want you to come," Emma said, and her voice had that tone, the tone that meant she wasn't going to take no for an answer. "It's only an hour. Come on. Celebrate the town. Celebrate your service." "Emma, I don't think," Sarah had started. "No," Emma interrupted. "You're coming. I'm taking the day off work. We're going to go to the parade together, and we're going to have a nice time. Mom, you need to get out of that house." Sarah had wanted to argue, but she heard the desperation in her daughter's voice. Emma was worried about her. Emma was trying. And maybe, Sarah had thought, it would be nice to spend time with her daughter without the phone line between them. So on a cold November morning, Sarah and Emma stood on the sidewalk of Main Street, waiting for the parade to start. Sarah wore her dress uniform jacket over a blue sweater. She had kept the uniform pressed, even though she never wore it. It felt right, somehow, to wear it for this. Emma wore a warm coat and stood close to her mother, their shoulders almost touching. The parade began at 10 o'clock. The high school band came first, then the Boy Scouts, then the Girl Scouts with their colorful uniforms. The color guard passed, holding the flags high. Sarah felt something shift in her chest as the American flag went by. She always felt this way when she saw the flag. It was a feeling she couldn't explain to anyone who hadn't served. General Margaret Sullivan was in a convertible, slowly moving down Main Street. She was tall, even sitting down, with silver hair and the kind of posture that made it clear she had spent her entire adult life in the military. She wore her dress uniform, covered in ribbons and medals that told the story of a lifetime of service. She waved to the crowds with a genuine smile, and people cheered. Sarah watched her pass by. She felt a strange mix of pride and something else, something that might have been envy, though she didn't want to admit that. The general was a woman who had made it to the top. A woman who was celebrated and honored. A woman who was visible. As the general's car moved past, she made eye contact with Sarah. Just for a moment. Their eyes met across the space of the crowd, and Sarah saw something in the general's expression shift. It was as if she had recognized something in Sarah, the bearing, the posture, the invisible weight that soldiers carried. The general turned slightly in her seat and snapped a salute. Sarah's hand moved without her thinking about it. She returned the salute, formal and clean, held it for exactly 2 seconds, and then dropped her hand. It was the language of the military, more eloquent than words. In that single moment of recognition, Sarah felt something unlock inside her chest. Emma grabbed her mother's hand and squeezed it. After the parade, the town held a formal reception in the community center. All the veterans were invited. Sarah almost skipped it, but Emma had already paid for both of them, and she gave her mother a look that said non-negotiable. The community center's main hall was decorated with red, white, and blue streamers. A local caterer had provided food, mostly the kind of things that taste like nothing, but were presented nicely on white platters. There was a small band playing patriotic music. And there was General Margaret Sullivan, standing near the center of the room, surrounded by town officials and local people who wanted to shake her hand and take pictures. Sarah and Emma got plates of food they didn't want and found a spot near the back of the room. Sarah was trying to be invisible again, which was easier in a crowded room. She could just stand there and observe, and eventually they could leave. But then someone tapped her shoulder. "Master Sergeant Mitchell," a woman's voice said. Sarah turned around. It was a young woman in an army uniform, the general's aide, Sarah realized from the insignia. "General Sullivan would like to speak with you," the aide said. "Can you come with me?" Sarah's heart rate spiked in a way she hadn't experienced in years. Emma's hand found hers and squeezed it, encouraging. The aide led Sarah and Emma through the crowd toward the general. As they approached, General Sullivan turned away from the town council members she had been talking to and focused entirely on Sarah. It was the kind of focused attention that a 4-star general could give, absolute, undivided, and slightly terrifying. "Master Sergeant Mitchell," the general said, extending her hand. "I recognized you from the parade." Sarah shook the general's hand. The grip was firm and warm. "I don't want to presume," the general said, "but I suspect you've been having a difficult time since your discharge." Sarah wasn't sure how to respond. She settled on the truth. "Yes, ma'am," Sarah said quietly. The general glanced around the room, and her expression hardened slightly. "Walk with me," she said, and it wasn't a request. The general led Sarah to a quiet corner of the room, away from the crowds. Emma stayed behind, watching them with an expression of hope on her face. "How long?" the general asked. 20 years, ma'am," Sarah said. Combat deployments? 4, ma'am. The general nodded slowly. And nobody here understands what that means. They thank you for your service, but they don't really see you. They don't really know what you sacrificed. Sarah felt something crack inside her. She had not expected to be truly seen by anyone ever again. It's not their fault, Sarah said quietly. They just don't understand the experience. No, the general agreed. But they should try. And if they won't see you on their own, maybe they need some help understanding. The general smiled, and it was a smile that held secrets. I'm going to be in town for 3 more days, the general said. I'm doing some public events, some interviews with the local paper. I want you to meet me. I have something in mind. Ma'am? Sarah asked. Trust me, the general said. You've been invisible long enough. That night, Sarah lay in bed unable to sleep. Emma had stayed over, sleeping in the guest room. Sarah kept replaying the moment when the general had saluted her, when she had been truly seen. And she wondered what the general had in mind. She didn't know it yet, but she was about to be put directly in the path of the truth about Millbrook. And that truth was going to change everything. The next morning, Sarah received a call from General Sullivan's aide. The general wanted to meet her at the Millbrook Public Library at 2 o'clock. Sarah was to come alone. Sarah arrived 15 minutes early, a habit born from a lifetime of military punctuality. The library was a small brick building that had been renovated 5 years ago. Mrs. Dorothy Hendricks, the head librarian, gave Sarah a friendly nod as she walked in. Dorothy was a woman in her 70s who seemed to genuinely know everyone in town. Sarah liked her, though they had never had a real conversation. General Sullivan was waiting in one of the study rooms, the private ones used for research and meetings. She was dressed in civilian clothes, navy slacks and a cream-colored blouse, but she still carried herself like a 4-star general. She was not alone. With her was a man in his 50s wearing glasses and carrying a thick folder. Master Sergeant Mitchell, thank you for coming, the general said. This is Dr. Thomas Walters. He's a historian with the Army's Historical Records Department. Thomas has been doing some research, and I think you need to hear what he's found. Sarah sat down across from them, feeling a sense of unease creeping up her spine. Dr. Walters opened a folder and pulled out several documents. They looked old, photocopies, mostly, but clearly from actual military records. I was researching the general's request, Dr. Walters began, looking into the military history of the Millbrook area. It's a small town, so I expected to find maybe a few soldiers from recent conflicts. But then I found something else. Something much bigger. He laid out the first document. It was a letter, dated 1952, addressed to the Town Council of Millbrook, Pennsylvania. There was a soldier from Millbrook, Dr. Walters continued. A young man named David Chen. He served in Korea. And according to all official records, he was captured by enemy forces and presumed dead. Sarah wasn't sure why she needed to hear this historical information. But she listened. However, Dr. Walters said, laying out more documents, I found unofficial reports, personal letters from other soldiers, that indicated David Chen had actually escaped capture. He had made it back to friendly lines. There's even a report here that mentions he was treated for injuries at a field hospital. The general leaned forward slightly. The reason I'm telling you this, Dr. Walters said, is because I found more recent communications in the town archives. In 1953, the American Legion chapter in Millbrook wrote a letter to the military asking for updated information about David Chen. The response they received, according to the town records, was that he remained missing and presumed dead. But I have evidence that's not what the actual military report said. Sarah was beginning to understand. This was about someone being erased. Someone being made invisible by incorrect official records. What does this have to do with me? Sarah asked. The general answered. Because this morning, I had my staff do a deeper investigation. Dr. Walters gave me the information about David Chen, and I asked them to look into the town's records more carefully. And they found something else. General Sullivan placed a file in front of Sarah. "Your great-uncle," she said. "David Chen Mitchell. Your grandmother was his sister." Sarah opened the file with shaking hands. Inside were documents, some she recognized from her family history searches, some she had never seen before. There was a photograph of a young man in an army uniform from the 1950s. She could see the family resemblance in his face. She could see herself in his features. "He came home," the general said quietly. "According to interviews I found in the local historical society, interviews that have been in the archives for 70 years but apparently never properly catalogued, David Chen came home to Millbrook in 1954. But he came home as a man whose official military records still said he was missing and presumed dead." Sarah looked up from the file. "The town didn't know what to do with that," the general continued. "They didn't celebrate his return. The Legion didn't organize a welcome home parade. And worst of all, the military never corrected the official records. He lived the rest of his life here. He eventually changed his name to just David Mitchell, dropping the Chen, and he died in 1993 without ever being officially recognized as a survivor. As far as the official military record goes, he's still missing and presumed dead." "Why are you telling me this?" Sarah asked, though she thought she might already know the answer. "Because," the general said, "I believe your family's history in this town has been erased. Your great-uncle's sacrifice was ignored. And I suspect, based on what I've learned about this community in the past 2 days, that this isn't an isolated incident." Dr. Walters cleared his throat. "What the general is suggesting is that we correct the record. Both for David Chen Mitchell and for all the other veterans from Millbrook who have been overlooked or forgotten. And we'll need someone to lead this effort. Someone from the community. Someone who understands what it means to serve." Sarah understood now. The general wasn't just trying to help her feel better about her own situation. She was asking Sarah to help expose something much larger. "What would I need to do?" Sarah asked. "Start with the Historical Society," the general said. "Review their records. Talk to the families of other veterans. Find the stories that have been forgotten or misplaced. And then we'll work on making sure those stories are corrected in the official military records." "This could take months," Sarah said. "It probably will," the general agreed. "But you won't be invisible anymore. You'll have purpose. Real purpose. And you'll be helping to give recognition to soldiers who have been denied it for decades." Sarah felt something shift inside her. This was not the kind of work she had expected to find. It was not the kind of work she would have chosen for herself. But it was work that needed to be done, and she was the right person to do it. "I'll need access to the military's Historical Records Department," Sarah said. "And probably to the Veterans Administration." "Done," the general said. "And you'll have my full support and the support of the Army's Heritage Records Office. Whatever you need." Sarah looked at the photograph of her great-uncle again. David Chen Mitchell. A soldier who had come home but never really been seen. Over the next 4 weeks, Sarah threw herself into the work with a focus and intensity that surprised her. It was the first time since her discharge that she had felt like she had a real job to do. She spent her days in the Millbrook Historical Society, a small museum housed in what used to be the town's first library. The director was an elderly woman named Judith who was thrilled to have someone helping organize the veteran records. Sarah worked methodically through boxes of documents, newspaper clippings, photographs, and personal letters. She created a database of every soldier from Millbrook who had served since World War I. She tracked down service records, discharge papers, and in several cases, official military records that contained errors or omissions. What she found was staggering. There was Samuel Murphy, who had served as a medic in World War II and had been listed as wounded in action. The official records had him as injured in the field, but the personal accounts from soldiers who served with him indicated he had been captured and held as a prisoner of war for the last year of the war. The town had never known. There was no record of a capture, no mention of his time as a POW. There was Thomas Reeves, who had flown B-17 bombers in the European theater. The official record said he had completed 32 missions. But a retired Air Force officer who had served with him had written a letter in 1978 that mentioned Thomas had actually flown 37 missions before being wounded. The correction had never been made to the official records. And there were 3 other soldiers whose official records had similar discrepancies or omissions. Sarah documented everything carefully, creating detailed reports with supporting evidence. She contacted the National Archives, the Army Historical Records Department, and the Department of Veterans Affairs. She learned how to navigate bureaucratic systems that had been put in place decades ago and were resistant to change. General Sullivan called once a week to check on her progress. Emma came to the library after her shifts and helped her organize files. For the first time since her discharge, Sarah felt like she was part of something that mattered. By early December, Sarah had compiled a comprehensive report detailing the service records of 16 soldiers from Millbrook who had been either missing from official records, incorrectly documented, or whose contributions had been forgotten by the community. She prepared a presentation for the town council, with General Sullivan's support. The presentation took place on a Tuesday evening in the town council chambers. Sarah stood at a podium in front of the council members, the town mayor, and about 50 community members who had been invited. She was nervous. Public speaking had never been her strong suit, but she had learned long ago how to function despite fear. "My name is Sarah Mitchell," she began. "I'm a veteran of the United States Army. 20 years of service. And I'm here tonight to talk about the veterans of Millbrook who have been forgotten or misrecognized." She walked through each soldier's story methodically. She showed photographs. She read excerpts from soldiers' letters and official reports. She detailed the discrepancies between the official military records and the actual historical evidence of their service. When she got to her great-uncle David Chin Mitchell, she paused. "David Chin Mitchell was born and raised in Millbrook," Sarah said quietly. "He served his country with honor in Korea. He survived capture and came home to this town. But his homecoming was never celebrated. The official military records still list him as missing and presumed dead, even though he lived here for 39 more years after the war. He was invisible to his own community." She looked around the room at the faces watching her. "Every one of these soldiers," Sarah continued, "served because they believed in something bigger than themselves. They served for their country, for their community, for the people they loved. And when they came home, they deserved to be seen, to be recognized, to be honored. But many of them weren't. Many of them are still invisible, even in death." Sarah pulled up the final document on the screen behind her, a formal request to the Department of the Army to correct the military service records for all 16 soldiers. "I'm asking this town," Sarah said, "to help me make sure these soldiers are no longer invisible. I'm asking for your support in getting the official records corrected. And I'm asking that we create a permanent memorial in Millbrook to honor not just our soldiers, but the stories we tell about them, the true stories, not the incomplete ones." She stepped back from the podium and waited. There was silence for a moment. Then one of the council members, a man named Robert who owned the hardware store, stood up. "Master Sergeant Mitchell," he said, "I was friends with Samuel Murphy's son. He passed away 5 years ago, but I know he would have been grateful to know that his father's service was finally being recognized correctly. I move that we support your effort." Another council member seconded the motion. The vote was unanimous. Over the next 3 weeks, Sarah worked with the Department of the Army to file official correction requests for all 16 soldiers. It was slow, bureaucratic work, but it was work that mattered. And slowly, the corrections began to be made. The Army's Historical Records Department issued a formal statement acknowledging the discrepancies in the service records and committing to ensuring that all veteran records would be thoroughly reviewed for accuracy. The Millbrook Historical Society organized an event to honor the veterans and their families. Families came from across Pennsylvania and beyond to be recognized. Sarah gave a speech at the event, talking about the importance of seeing veterans, of honoring their service truly and completely. Local newspapers picked up the story. A regional television station did a feature on Sarah's work. She was interviewed on a morning show about the importance of accurate historical records and proper recognition of veteran service. And then, on a cold Thursday morning just before Christmas, Sarah received a phone call from the Department of Veterans Affairs. The voice on the other end of the line was official and professional, but underneath it was genuine emotion. "Master Sergeant Mitchell," the woman said, "I'm calling to inform you that the corrections to David Chin Mitchell's service records have been officially processed and approved. As of today, his official record now correctly identifies him as a prisoner of war who was released and returned to duty. He is no longer listed as missing and presumed dead." Sarah felt tears on her face, though she didn't remember starting to cry. "Thank you," she said simply. That evening, Emma came over, and they sat together in Sarah's living room. The television was playing a Christmas special, but neither of them was really watching. "Mom," Emma said, "I'm proud of you." "I've never said that before, not really. But I am. I'm so proud of you." Sarah put her arm around her daughter. "It wasn't me," she said. "It was General Sullivan. She saw something in me." "No," Emma interrupted. "It was you. She opened the door, but you walked through it. You did the work. You found the truth. You made people see it." Sarah squeezed her daughter's shoulder. What Sarah didn't know, what nobody knew except for General Sullivan herself, was that there was one more truth waiting to be revealed. One more reason the general had come to Millbrook. And that truth would change Sarah's life in a way she couldn't have imagined. In late January, Sarah received an official letter from the Army Human Resources Command. It was a thick envelope, the kind that usually contained important documents. Inside was an invitation to Washington, D.C. The letter explained that General Margaret Sullivan had submitted a formal commendation for Sarah's service to the community and the Military Records Correction Initiative. The commendation was being presented at the Pentagon during an official ceremony scheduled for February 15. Sarah was invited to attend as the honored guest. Sarah read the letter 3 times, certain she was misunderstanding something. A ceremony at the Pentagon. Her name, officially recognized, in an official Army document. She called Emma first. "Mom, you have to go," Emma said immediately. "This is huge. This is official recognition." Then Sarah called General Sullivan's office. The general called her back personally within an hour. "I'm glad you received the invitation," the general said. "I wanted to tell you about this in person, but the official process moved faster than I expected. I hope you're pleased." "Ma'am, I don't understand," Sarah said honestly. I was just helping correct the records. I wasn't expecting any kind of official." "You don't understand because you're thinking like an enlisted soldier," the general said gently. "You did the work without expecting recognition. That's admirable. But your work has had real impact. The Army's Historical Records Department has completely overhauled their processes for reviewing military records for accuracy. 3 other communities have already requested assistance in doing similar projects. You started something much larger than you realized. But I was just following your training," the general finished. "Yes. And that training led you to do something remarkable. The Army recognizes that. And the Secretary of Defense wants to recognize it officially." Sarah felt dizzy. The Secretary of Defense. "What do I need to do?" Sarah asked. "Nothing," the general said. "Just show up at the Pentagon on February 15. Wear your dress uniform. We'll handle the rest." The next 3 weeks were a blur of preparation. Emma helped her get her dress uniform professionally cleaned and tailored. Sarah's hair was professionally cut and styled. She bought new shoes that matched the uniform standards. She spent hours preparing remarks that she might need to give, though the general hadn't told her she would need to give a speech. On February 14, Sarah flew to Washington, D.C. for the first time since her military days. Emma took the day off work and came with her. They stayed in a hotel near the Pentagon, and that night, they had dinner in a nice restaurant in Arlington while the rain fell outside and washed the streets clean. "Tomorrow you're going to walk into the Pentagon," Emma said, "and they're going to recognize you as a hero. Do you realize that?" "I didn't do anything heroic," Sarah said. "I just researched documents." "You did exactly what a hero does," Emma replied. "You saw an injustice, and you fixed it. You made people see things they had been ignoring. That is heroic, Mom." The next morning, Sarah put on her dress uniform. The medals on her chest caught the light. The uniform felt different than it used to. It felt like it fit her properly now, like her body had finally caught up to what the uniform represented. A car arrived to pick them up at 7 o'clock. The driver was a young soldier, a PFC, who was extremely nervous about making sure everything went smoothly. He drove them to the Pentagon and escorted them to a security checkpoint. Sarah's heart was beating faster than it had in years. Anticipation. Anxiety. Something between fear and hope. They were escorted through the Pentagon's long corridors. Sarah could see other soldiers in dress uniforms, officers moving through the halls with purpose. The building was exactly as she remembered it, imposing, formal, full of history. They arrived at a large conference room with long windows overlooking Arlington Cemetery. Inside, there were chairs set up in rows, and maybe 30 people already seated. There were high-ranking officers. There was what looked like a local news crew. There were several people Sarah didn't recognize. General Sullivan was standing at the front of the room, in her full dress uniform, more medals on her chest than Sarah could count. When she saw Sarah, she smiled. "Master Sergeant Mitchell," she said, loud enough that the whole room could hear. "I'm glad you made it." Sarah stood at attention. Emma sat down in the front row. A tall officer in a general's uniform, 4 stars on each shoulder, stepped forward. Sarah recognized him from official photographs. General James Mitchell. No relation, but the coincidence was not lost on her. He was the deputy commander of Army operations. "Master Sergeant Mitchell," he began, reading from a prepared statement, "you are here today to receive an official commendation for your exceptional service to the United States Army and the integrity of our military records." Sarah kept her face neutral, but her mind was racing. "During your 20 years of active service," he continued, "you earned a reputation as a leader of exceptional character. Upon your medical discharge, you could have chosen a quiet life, separated from the military that had been your life's work. But instead, you chose to serve your community and your country by identifying and correcting significant discrepancies in military service records spanning 7 decades. He gestured, and someone brought forward a large framed document. "Your work has resulted in the official correction of 16 military service records and has prompted a comprehensive review of our entire archival system. The impact of your work will benefit veterans and their families for generations to come." The general looked directly at Sarah. "For your exceptional service, past and present, the Secretary of Defense has authorized the presentation of the Medal of Commendation." Sarah watched, almost unable to believe what was happening, as the general presented her with the medal. It was a formal military decoration, official and real, with a red and white ribbon. When she had held the position before she finished, the room erupted in applause. Sarah kept her composure, but she could feel tears trying to form. She held them back through sheer force of will and military bearing. After the official ceremony, there was a reception. Officers congratulated her. A representative from the Secretary of Defense shook her hand. A journalist from the Washington Post asked if she would do an interview. But the moment that mattered most came when General Sullivan pulled her aside into a quieter corner of the room. "There's something else I need to tell you," the general said quietly. "Something I've been waiting for the right moment to share." Sarah looked at the four-star general, confused. 23 years ago, the general continued, I was a major, serving in Bosnia. I was part of a peacekeeping operation that went badly. A group of my soldiers was pinned down in a valley, taking heavy fire. We had no support available. We had no backup. Standard protocol would have been to wait for air support. Sarah felt her throat tighten. She had heard stories like this before. But one of my unit members, the general said, a master sergeant, took it upon herself to organize a ground evacuation. She knew the terrain. She knew the risks. She led a group of 3 other soldiers through enemy fire to reach the pinned-down group. They were able to extract everyone without losing a single soldier. The general paused. That master sergeant, she continued, was never officially recognized for that action. It was documented in the after-action reports, but the official commendation was somehow lost in the shuffle. And I let it slide because I didn't know how to fight the system. I've regretted that for more than 2 decades. Sarah's face had gone pale. She knew exactly what the general was talking about. She had tried never to think about that day. It had haunted her nightmares for years. The master sergeant, the general said slowly, was you. Sarah couldn't speak. She had spent the last few weeks believing that she was being recognized for her work with the historical records. The documents. The research. That work had been real and important, but it wasn't why the general had come to Millbrook. The general had always known. The general had come to give Sarah recognition for something she had done long ago. During my research into your service record, the general said, I discovered that while the after-action report mentioned the evacuation, the official recommendation for commendation was never filed. It got lost somewhere in the system. I have spent the last 3 months working with the Army's Historical Records Department to find that documentation and get it corrected. The general pulled out another document from inside her jacket. This is an official commendation, she said, for your actions on June 15, 2001. It has been officially processed and filed with the Department of Defense. You have been awarded the Soldier's Medal, the second highest non-combat heroism award in the Army. Sarah took the document with shaking hands. The Soldier's Medal. She could feel the weight of it. But that was so long ago, Sarah whispered. That was. I just did what needed to be done. I know, the general said. That's why you deserve this. You didn't do it for recognition. You did it because soldiers under your command needed help. And you did it perfectly. You executed a tactical evacuation under enemy fire, and everyone came home. Sarah looked at the general, and suddenly she understood everything. The general had come to Millbrook for 2 reasons. The Historical Records project was real and important. But underneath it, the general had always been working to recognize a soldier who had been invisible for 23 years. I don't know what to say, Sarah said. Say thank you, the general said. And say you'll keep doing what you're doing. Keep making people see. Keep telling the truth. Keep being the kind of soldier and person who deserves to be recognized. That evening, Sarah and Emma stood in their hotel room overlooking Arlington Cemetery. The sunset was painting the sky orange and pink. Sarah held the 2 medals in her hands, the commendation she had earned in the Pentagon today, and the Soldier's Medal for actions from 23 years ago. You know what I realized? Emma said, standing next to her mother. What? Sarah asked. The whole time you've been home, Emma said, you felt invisible because the people around you didn't know how to see you. But the people who mattered, the people who had really known you, who had served with you, they always saw you. They always knew. It just took someone important enough to make everyone else see it too. Sarah squeezed her daughter's hand. The next morning, Sarah and Emma flew back to Millbrook. By evening, the local news had picked up the story. Sarah Mitchell, the invisible soldier from Millbrook, had been officially recognized by the Pentagon. She had not 1, but 2 military commendations. She had changed how the military kept records. She had made veterans visible. Within a week, the town council voted to name the Millbrook Community Center's new addition the Sarah Mitchell Memorial Wing for Veterans. There was no need for memorial, Sarah was very much alive, but it was the town's way of saying thank you. Of saying we see you now. Sarah continued her work with the historical records. More communities reached out for help. The Army's Historical Records Department expanded its review processes nationally. Over the next year, more than 100 service records were corrected or updated based on the processes Sarah had helped develop. And Sarah was no longer invisible. In Millbrook, people saw her. They greeted her. They thanked her. Children learned about her in school. She had become part of the town's story, not as the forgotten veteran, but as the woman who made sure nobody else would be forgotten. 6 months after the Pentagon ceremony, Sarah was offered a position as a civilian consultant to the Army's Historical Records Department. It was work she could do partly from home and partly in Washington, D.C. work that mattered. Work that honored soldiers and preserved their stories. She accepted it immediately. On her first day in the new role, Sarah wore the dress uniform jacket she had been wearing in the Millbrook coffee shop all those months ago. But this time, she wore it with the medals on her chest. This time, she was visible. She thought about her great-uncle David Chin Mitchell, the soldier who had come home but never been seen. She thought about all the soldiers throughout history who had done extraordinary things that nobody knew about. She thought about her own service, about the moment in Bosnia when she had made a decision that could have killed her but instead had saved the lives of her soldiers. And she thought about General Margaret Sullivan, who had seen her at a parade and recognized something in her worth saving. When you are invisible for long enough, you forget what it feels like to be seen. Sarah had learned that lesson. But she had also learned that visibility was worth fighting for. Not for yourself alone, but for everyone who was still invisible.